Hello, I'm Jamie Flinchball, host of People Solve Problems, and I have Russell Watkins with me today. Russell, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Nice to be here, Jamie.
Oh, glad to have you from across the pond, as they say. Um, Russell's the co-founder of Sempai, consulting organization, author of Adventures in Lean Land, which has been out quite a while now, if I remember correctly. And I love a bit of how you describe yourself. You've tried a lot of stuff and learned from mistakes. Um, and I've enjoyed, we've engaged over LinkedIn quite a bit over content, and you're very candid and open with your own thought process, not just sort of repeating what you've learned. So I really appreciate the style because it's certainly part of my goal as well.
Well, that suits me down to the ground. In fact, you're right. Adventure in Leanland I wrote in 2011. I'm working, and I have been working on Misadventure in Leanland for a while. And in that, I'm looking to codify and lay out my mistakes as a kind of looking back and thinking, blimey, here's the mistakes I've made, and here's the common mistakes I've seen. Because there's something about writing that clarifies thinking, isn't there? There's something that helps you to...
Well, I really say I write for myself first, and it does clarify my thinking. And while I only had one chapter on pitfalls, when Ada Carlino and I wrote our first book, which is getting close to 20 years now, but A Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean, Lessons from the Road, right? It was the same idea. It's like, here's some of the things we've just learned through our travels. And I love the idea of the misadventures. That'll be good to see. So speaking of some of the stuff you wrote an article last year, how to hone your problem-solving method through watching movies. And we had an exchange around it because I just found it fascinating. First, you shared your own little, rough notes that you were taking. So first, tell me about your love of movies. Like, how does that fit into all this stuff?
Well, movies, as a teenager, as a way of escape from family life, I discovered movies probably aged 13, 14 and realized, hey, I can have 2-3 hours a week here where the world just melts away and I can become absorbed in something. And then it's only later on when you start to pick up a skill that you must start to make parallels between, problem solving is so obvious, problem solving, capability development. This is what I've learned, and this is, there are examples here parallels that I can see. Now, what's really interesting is that most of the time we tend to, the industry we all propagate of using sporting examples to explain business.
Yes.
And we sometimes overuse those, I think, and we simplify and a bit reductive. I actually quite like to use movies when I can establish rapport and know that somebody likes a movie. I like to use movies as examples. And movies like Apollo 13, a classic, World War Z, The Founder, obviously The Founder, fantastic industrial engineering scene in the car park with the chalking out.
Yep.
And The Martian, I think, is a fabulous film, although very different to Andy Weir's book. It's a fabulous film to pull apart the types of problem solving and the kind of skills you need to problem solve, because I don't believe problem solving is one skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on movies, for me, we both travel a lot. I used to travel 48 weeks a year. And so it was all these flights that often got me into movies because it was a great way to kind of check out for a little bit. And I love a good movie quote. I mean, people have heard me quote everything from The Matrix to A League of Their Own, in trying to make a teaching point, right, as I go. So I probably don't always use the storyline perhaps the way you do, but I do love a good movie quote.
Well, I tend to use a quote as well. There's one from a great Denis Villeneuve film, Sicario, where when somebody wants to understand something too early, they want to intellectually grasp and then jump up and jump forward and just accumulate knowledge rather than skill.
Yeah.
There's a scene on the plane where Alejandro, the Sicario, says, "Look, you're asking me how a clock works. For the moment, let's just keep an eye on the time." which is quite a nice summary for some
That
people.
that's a fantastic quote. So this post was about The Martian, right? And that movie and the problem solving that went in it. I 100% agree with you that problem solving isn't a skill. It's a composite of many skills, and that you can be strong in one, weak in another, and they all elevate your problem solving, but it's not a singular skill.
Yeah.
So you in this particular article lay out the four types of problems, and kind of map it into the movie a bit. So could you elaborate for the listeners, kind of the four types of problems and how you see them as different related aspects of problem solving?
Sure. So first off, I have to give due hat tip here to the man who came up with the four types of problems, which is R. Smalley, one of the very first American catcher, I think he was, American managers in Toyota Japan.
Yes, he was.
He's done a lot to codify, in practical, simple ways, what we now grasp as the deeper lean aspects, some of the thinking behind the obvious stuff. I used to think of problem solving in terms of problem and abnormality. So you have abnormalities that if you're quick enough, you can find them and avoid a problem, and then you have problems. The favour that R. Smalley's thinking has done for me is that he breaks it into four types of problems. Two of them are created, and two of them are caused. So two happen to you, and two of them you cause yourself. And there's a kind of escalating stairway, if you like. So the first type of problem is your troubleshooting. So when something happens and goes wrong on the Gemba and you have to return to normal, you are trying to get a process back to the normal state. And that's a troubleshooting thing where you have to have a skill of dealing with abnormality, returning to standard where you can, and if you can't, escalating the right stuff at the right time. Then there is the gap to standard. And that's where you have a standard. It could be a standard cycle time. It could be a standard defect percentage. You have a gap to it currently, and you're looking to improve and close that standard. Those are the cause problems, if you like. That's the, before you get to Kaizen, you've got to mitigate losses bit. And then you have, so those are type 1 and 2. Type 3 is the target setting where you're okay. You're hitting your standard, but to remain competitive, you've got to do something different. You've got to elevate your standard or remove obstacles to help you get to your Hoshin, to your policy deployment. So you're looking to improve. And then the type 4, which I think is the least easy to grasp, the innovation-oriented one, where it's open-ended and you're trying to take a business to a different place by thinking without boundaries. That's my summary. Do you agree with that? Is there anything you tweak on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good. Durwood Sobek, who actually co-authored a different book with Art Smalley, he defines them as often ill-defined and open-ended, which I think is a good description. So the open-ended is the fewer boundaries, not no boundaries, but just fewer boundaries, and the ill-defined is we don't even know what the gap is yet. Right, so we're going to start solving the gap, but we don't even know what the gap is. That's what makes it ill-defined.
Yeah, that's a nice summary. And sat behind all of this, lurking in the background, is I think a common pitfall of we tend to high five too early. So we'll get to the movie, but that thing about understanding that if you are improving something if you're below standard, yes, you're improving it, but you're not actually creating Kaizen. You are improving something, but you're only returning to where you expect it to be. So be careful with the high-fiving all around because you've done a project that closes a gap.
Right.
And in the UK and certainly in Europe, and to be fair, wherever I've gone in the world, that differentiation isn't well grasped.
Yeah, and usually, yes, I think too often people just look at where they were because that's their context, right? That's their history. They look at where they were. They have a gap. They need to close that gap, and they don't even consider is the standard I'm returning to the right one. And I'll just give a quick recent example. I was working with somebody who they felt their calendar had gotten out of whack, and they needed to reclaim some hours because they had some really heavy lifting to do, some big sort of project work that they needed to immerse themselves on. So their main goal, their gap to standard was, how do I find 3 to 4 hours in the week? But then when we really examined what the person was trying to accomplish, I said, well, it's 3 to 4 hours really. Should your goal, should your target be, how do I free up half of my time? Right? Because it was that different target which really set him out about the capacity he needs to go do new things. And so it sort of converted. He was sort of stuck in type 2 thinking, right? Gap to standard. And in that, before he even went to problem solving, really realized, well, he probably needs to be in category 3, elevating and picking a new target, which then leads to very different problem solving.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess you're pushing him to think harder. So you're not pushing him to find minutes at the margins. Where can I tweak this, tweak that? You're asking him to fundamentally rethink the way he works.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, fair enough. Makes sense. But some of this stuff can blow your mind, can't it? Can I tell you a quick story I read it was a book by a Japanese author a couple of years ago that blew my mind 2 years ago. I love the fact that I've been doing lean for 30 years and my mind gets blown still. It's fabulous. He was recounting a story. It was Toyota based, where I think it might have been Kentucky or Georgetown. Yeah, I'm not sure. TMMK, I think. But a team had set out to solve a problem, and on a PDCA cycle, they intended to reduce it by, let's say, 50%. They actually reduced it by 70% on the check. So they'd done their PDCA and they'd done their ACT and standardized. The sensei was livid, absolutely livid, because they were high-fiving. And he was livid because if you hit 70% reduction and you aim for 50% reduction, it's not a success. It means there was a flaw in your thinking way. There was a gap in your expectation of the outcome. Now, it blew my mind because it's a beautiful way of summarizing Hansei and that restlessness, which is a really difficult way to live. But that kind of framing is really interesting for problem solving, as in you can problem solve your problem solving within your PDCA cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the benefit of a coach, because they're focused more on the process and they help you reflect on what you're learning about how you're working. And you know, our own human biases, to use that example, is if we have a surprise to the downside, we blame lack of information or, you know, something that we couldn't see. If we have a surprise to the upside, to your point, we're like, well, we're just more talented than we thought. That's the surprise. And
Yeah,
we chalk it up to that instead of being curious around, wow, how did I miss that? Right. So I like to do this to myself, where I estimate time and this task's going to take me 3 hours. And then I find out it took me 20 minutes. And I'm like, why did I overestimate it by so much? Because that overestimation led to delay, and it was a problem. So it wasn't a positive surprise. It was a learning opportunity. It was a reflection.
But it's a relentless way to live, isn't it? And it takes us in a way to the Martian via a Zen story about a Zen master watching a fox chasing a rabbit and coming to the conclusion with the student that most of the time the rabbit will evade the fox because the fox is running for its lunch and the rabbit is running for its life. And I guess on the Martian, the big framing device we have to think about here is, you are likely to problem solve well if you can keep your temperament calm when your life depends on it.
Yes.
Which it did all the way throughout the film. And in fact, I watched the film, and I watched it a number of times. And I managed to classify, I've got them here, 29 problems. I had 6 troubleshooting, 4 gaps from standard, 9 target setting, and 10 innovation oriented. But then I started to think, well, none of this is really the top end ones, the innovation oriented. They showed the hallmarks of innovative thinking, but actually it was all troubleshooting. It was all caused problem.
Yeah.
So I doing that deep analysis and doing my little chart for 2.5 hours, because it's a long film, it actually just ended up with more questions for me.
Well, I'd imagine that certain types of problem solving makes for better movies, right? You mentioned the founder as an example, definitely some innovation oriented and target setting type of problem solving that went on there. How long should it take to get a hamburger out to the window is sort of the target setting kind. But um, so certainly a lot of what we teach problem solving really focuses on the gap to standard, right? That's where a lot of the teaching goes on. So what prevents us from thinking about the other types also as problem solving, right? So often people will say, oh, I'm doing problem solving when I'm doing gap to standard, and innovation, oh, that's just human genius, but it's a different type of problem solving. So what prevents people from seeing all four types as just different types of problem solving?
Well, you're asking the right question for me, because the natural question that comes out of Smalley's model is, so what? So what does this mean for my monozukuri, for my capability development in my business? Do I need to teach or upskill people in four ways? The answer is some maybe yes, but there'll be a bias towards the shop floor for the bottom side, and then maybe not for the top side. Why do we bias certain places? I think the way that we've codified lean, we've been selective and we've been over biased in certain areas. So the gap to standard, A3, fishbone, 5Y, quality circles, they all nicely fit there, and they are understandable, gift wrapped tools that help people. The target setting, I think we're becoming smarter on in terms of the Hoshin, but Hoshin is still a bit vague sometimes. The catchball isn't well understood, and it's over engineered. The one that really interests me, Jamie, is the troubleshooting, because I spend a lot of time, and I have done for the last 3 years, with really strong operators, setters, and team leaders on fault finding and troubleshooting. And one of the very first things we end up doing throughout the team leader, supervisor, group leader, ops manager chain of command is understanding, what should I be dealing with? What are the parameters of my span of control? And when should I escalate? And when should I escalate doesn't mean when you have a problem or when you feel uncomfortable. It means, right, if you have more than 3 defects in 1 hour for a certain type of business, or if you have a breakdown and you spend 15 minutes trying to fix it with your setter and then you can't fix it, then escalate. I think those things are too, I hate to say this, they are too dull for most people. They are really important, but I think lean people like us who like the sexy stuff, like Kanban and Hijunka, I think getting into the nitty gritty of the basic control skills, I love it, but I think it's a bit unsexy for a number of people.
Sure, it's unsexy. It doesn't feel all that compelling. But when you consider troubleshooting, both in terms of efficiency but also outcome, right? So efficiency is how fast do I get to matching the right solution? Because that's what most troubleshooting is, not finding the solution, it's matching the solution, right? Known solutions, known problems. So how much time does it take to match the solution? And then is it actually right?
Yeah.
And, if you go look at how many problems you might have throughout a week, the amount of opportunities to either lose time or gain time by being more efficient at troubleshooting is essential. And manufacturing is more obvious. So that's where I love, when I talk about product development, we talk about granularity, right? So if I can see progress every day through the granularity, then troubleshooting is much easier to do because the problems are smaller and the solution set's available. Like, hey, I lost a day. Oh, how do we solve for that? Oh, we've been losing a day every day for the last 9 months. Like, okay, I can't troubleshoot my way anymore.
That's a really good point, and that comes back to some basic lean tools about visualizing and having a cadence in the process and making sure that everyone can see where we are and are we on target or not.
Yeah. So a lot of, and tell me if you think this is true. A lot of the things we do put in place with lean journeys, like huddles and scoreboards and standards and 5S, is that just to make the troubleshooting easier. And so that we don't have to talk about it so directly, but it just starts to become a little more natural.
It would be if people thought that hard about it. And the tools got joined up. I
think that's an important point, though. If they thought about it that way, that's the important part.
Yeah, I've no issue with a tool for a purpose. So if somebody, I suspect we're similar in this. If somebody wants to work with us, then on the initial call, before visiting or going any deeper, the question, and there's nothing new in this. The two questions are, why can't you do this yourself? Which asks them about their capability, and have they thought about their capability, and is there a real reason for getting in touch? And secondly, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Give me a specific framed problem. It's okay if you haven't entirely framed it. Let's have a conversation around it. But if you called me because you want to do 5S, or you called me because you want to do lean, we're going to have to get beyond that rapidly. And I think then if you get beyond it to the problem, you keep the eye on that, then the tool as the mechanism to get there, it's a lot easier to join it up for the end result.
I like that phrasing, and it's a much, the job of a lean journey is not just to make it easy. We still have to do the hard thinking to understand it as we go forward. So yeah, love that. So we're pretty much out of time here, but I'd like to ask one last question just around the 4 types of problems. Besides reading the book, which I happen to have a copy of here, Art Smalley's book of 4 types of problems, you had one method here where you watch a movie and try to categorize, but what would be your advice to somebody who wants to learn the practice of looking at 4 types of problems? How would they start that as a practice?
Well, the first question is, why do they want to learn it? What are they trying to do? Do they, if they're trying to do it as an intellectual exercise, I would counsel against that, and I would say go out onto your shop and find a problem, or go into your business and find a problem to practice, and then once you found a problem, then try and categorize that problem and use that as a way in. If you could even use it. I was thinking of Smalley's 4 types of problems. You could create a sieve a bit like the Glenday sieve, or maybe some kind of filter on the world, where if you could imagine if you ran a business, it doesn't matter if it's retail, hospital, finance, manufacturing, and you could at a top level snapshot and quantify the amount of problems you have plus the scale of those problems into one of those 4 boxes, then you would have a lead into where is my capability most lacking in this business. So I feel like I've swerved your question there. Have I?
No, but that's. I mean, there's no right answer. It's just how do you get started using it? So those are excellent recommendations of how somebody might start to practice a little more and think about applying this filter as a method to move forward. So,
yeah. Ed, on a more prosaic level than that, on a more practical level than that overall business thing, if you're a supervisor or a manager listening to this, or an engineer, you could keep a simple gate chart for two or 3 weeks and just gate chart the 4 types of problems, learn what they are, and then see where the hotspots are, and then dig deeper into, right, what capability do we need to have to either tackle those problems or prevent those types of problems.
Fantastic. Well, appreciate you bringing a new topic, an interesting topic to our listeners. We'll certainly link to the post article you wrote in it, and who knows, I may watch my next movie with a tick mark to view the movie in the same way. I'm sure there's many movies this is an interesting exercise to do with.
Fantastic. Jamie, thanks. Enjoyed that.
I have as well. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for listening to the People Solve Problems podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Visit jflinch.com for more episodes and other content. And continue to join us on your podcast app, of course. We greatly appreciate your feedback through reviews and ratings. Consider expanding your understanding of problem solving with Jamie's book, People Solve Problems: The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. Available on Amazon. Until next time, Keep learning, innovating, and solving problems.